It's super old. Yeah, just the buildings are way old. 5 times older than America's oldest city. It's like if you go to Boston or something, you know, America's oldest. Budapest is way older than that. Budapest was established like in the thousands, like, or something like that. So it is incredibly old. The architecture is really different. It had a very European style. And I don't know, I thought it was really cool to see it. Because here in Provo, everything feels like it's new. You know, it just got built like 10 years ago at most, it seems like, at least. Compared to Hungary, when you go there and you can just tell how old the buildings are. They've redone them maybe 3 or 4 times. You know, they've had to restore the buildings. So a lot of those structures are super old. There's a lot of cultural differences as well. I mean, first the language. Like, you get off the plane and you start talking with Hungarians, and you could swear you're not, like, even listening to the language you actually were learning. Just because it's so different, you know? Hungarian history, we just learned about the myth of where, like, who their ancestors were. It's called roughly translated, the miracle stag, sort of. And so what happened is these guys, one is named Hunor, and the other is named Magor, I think. And they're hunters, and they're hunting, they're doing their hunting thing. And they see this magical stag, and it's like really beautiful, and then it's awesome. And so they want to hunt for it, like any good hunter would. So they follow this thing, and it leads them to this kind of swampy area. And they ask their father for permission to kind of colonize this area. So they live in this swampy area for a long time. And eventually, like, these 2 guys and their people go and kidnap the daughters of these other people. And together, they made the Magyars, which were the Hungarians. And eventually those people, you know, they became the Hungarian people, and they kind of wandered. This was somewhere in Armenia somewhere, kind of by the Black Sea. And eventually they wandered out of Central Eurasia over into the Carpathian Basin, which is where Hungary is. So, and that's, you know, ever since then they kind of lived there. They were really powerful in Europe for a while. Like, they were some of the most powerful people there, because they had this style of archery that they could basically ride a horse and guide it using their legs. And so they could just shoot arrows any which way they wanted. So they could just ride the horse and, you know, they'd pull the arrow. And if they wanted to turn backwards from the horse, they could do that. And this was kind of revolutionary at the time, I suppose. Apparently the other people in Europe couldn't do that for some reason. They kind of were more heavy cavalry type oriented. And so these light, you know, really agile hunters with their bows and arrows were able to conquer a lot of people. So they kind of lived like that for a while, and they just kept propagating. So as far as the climate goes, it was the best at both extremes. Like, I'm from Atlanta, Georgia, where it's extremely hot in the summer, but it never really gets all that cold. Over in Hungary, the summers are a lot like a southern summer. But the catch is that the people over there, they think that air conditioning gives you a cold. And so they don't believe in air conditioning. And so you're over there and it's 100 degrees, 100% humidity, sun is beating down on you, and you go inside and it's just like the only difference is the amount of light. And that's it. Like, the heat is completely the same on the inside. And you just kind of think to yourself, like, oh my gosh, like, all of your problems would be solved if you just got air conditioning, because it's just so painfully hot. There were times, you know, going home and you're supposed to write in your journal every night before you go to sleep or something like that, just something productive. But you kind of just lay on your bed and it's dark out and you're sweating still and you can't stop sweating, and you're just like, I kind of would rather just sleep. Like, I don't even want to write in my journal. It was kind of gross. Like, you'd try and write and your hands would stick to the pages because it was pretty humid. Then the winters are just as great, if not even better. It snows a ton, unlike Georgia. And so there's a lot of snow and it's really cold. And because of the humidity, the cold just like pierces right through you. Not the most fun I've ever had when I was you know, walking around in that weather. The snow gets super slushy and you're slipping everywhere trying to walk through it. So one time with me and my companion, there was nobody out, so we couldn't really find anyone, and so we just decided to put flyers for English class into people's mailboxes. I just remember it felt like some kind of expedition or something. Like, he walked in front of me and then I kind of walked in his tracks so that we didn't have to walk in too much snow. And there's just snow going everywhere. It was like a blizzard. It was probably the most extreme weather I've ever experienced. They kind of take what our concept is of Christmas and split it into two. So on the 6th of December, that's when Santa Claus comes. He's called Mikuláš or Nicholas. And that's just what they call him. And what they do for him is they take their shoes and put them in a windowsill or some other place that, you know, some outsider can access it. And they leave it overnight. And in the morning, he's brought them, you know, goodies and stuff. Like, he puts candy, chocolate, other things like that. Personally, I don't know if I would really want to have candy put in my shoes. But you know, that's one of their traditions. And so the second half of that is supposedly the baby Jesus is the one that delivers the presents on Christmas. Every city has its own history practically. And so there are a ton of things you can see. Like, Budapest has a ton of locations. They have what's called Buda Castle. Budapest is separated into Buda and Pest, and they each lie on either side of the Danube. And Buda is over on the west bank, and they're the ones that, it's a really hilly city, and so there are a lot of different outlooks and things like that. One of the biggest ones is Buda Castle and the Fisherman's Bastion. And so there's this area just on top of the hill, and there's this big castle. It's got a big dome. You know, there's a cathedral up there. There's all these cobblestone squares, and then there's this bastion that it's kind of lame. You have to pay for it to go up on it, but you go up and you can see all of Budapest. You can see like the Parliament over in the distance on the Pest bank of the river. You can see like this special mountain that they have, that there's a big statue on it that's holding up like an olive leaf, symbol of peace. And you can see the entire city practically. You can see, you know, you can see all the bridges. They have these really cool old bridges that go across the river, like 5 or 6 of them, and you can see all of those. The before mentioned mountain is another good place to go. It's called Gellért-hegy, or like Gellért Hill. And this has that statue. Ironically enough, that statue is a symbol of peace. It was given to them by the Russians as like a symbol of their freedom from the Nazi occupation. So it was kind of a out of the frying pan into the fire type of situation, but for the time being they were really happy, and you know, the Russians gave them this symbol of peace and things like that. But it's a cool statue. I mean, it's standing up there on the mountain. It's the first thing you see practically when you come into Budapest. You know, you can also get a really good view of the city. From there you can see Buda Castle and, you know, those other places, as well as the Parliament and the river, things like that. And, you know, there are all kinds of things to do in Budapest too. There's, you know, theaters. I guess you can see movies if you want to see a movie in Hungarian. But, you know, they have shopping, they have malls, they have all that stuff. So it's a really cool old city. It's a good mix of modern and ancient. One of my favorite cities that I served in was called Pécs. And it's right down on the southwestern border by Croatia. And that was a beautiful city. It's really hilly. It's in the hills. They have a big TV tower that sits on the mountain that overlooks the city. And it's actually got a big disc around it that you can go up inside and look from. So that's really cool, first off. But in the center of the city, this was one of the places that was occupied by the Turks in Hungary for a while, because there was a Turkish occupation. And one of the biggest influences of that is the big mosque that they have right in the center of the city, in the Főtér, which is translated as main square. They have the big mosque. You know, it's got that kind of mosque style. It's got a big green dome, brass dome, kind of more square than a cathedral is. It's got like the, you know, kind of Arabic looking stained glass and things like that. But when the Turks left, and the Catholics sort of repossessed Hungary, they converted this mosque into a cathedral. And so you go inside and there are motifs of Jesus and Mary and all these people, but there's also like Arabic writing on the walls and these Turkish lanterns that hang from the ceiling. It's super cool. On the very top they have this thing, it's like a crescent moon shape like this, that they put on mosques, and so the Christians just put like a cross right here sitting on top of it. So I mean, I guess that's making use of your resources, but it's really interesting. And then they have another 4-spired cathedral, which I think is like probably the closest looking thing to the Salt Lake Temple that they have. So I thought that was pretty cool. You know, it's just got 4 towers and kind of a center part that the 4 towers come off of. So, you know, they've got that big cathedral. The city center is beautiful. They have a street that's called King Street in Hungarian, and they have restaurants, bars. Not that many of us would go to those. They have hotels. They have the, you know, the National Theater of Pécs is there, and I've actually been there to see plays before. It's really cool. Also in Pécs, they have some lakes that are really nearby that you can go fishing in, things like that. So that's also pretty neat. Scattered throughout Hungary, besides Pécs, you have remnants of all kinds of castles that they had. I visited a few like abandoned castles when I was there. They're nothing like that big Disney one that you have in Germany in the Alps, but is pretty cool to see because, you know, it really told you how they lived, how they defended, things like that. We went to see one and you could just see all these villages surrounding it from the top of the tower, and I thought that was pretty cool too. You know, it just kind of showed you that there have been tumultuous times in those places. It was really peaceful at the time, but you know, you could tell that there had been wars and conflicts. It is one of the oldest countries in the world that exists as it is now, and you know, thus you can see all of the different periods of history that they had there. More funny story was when we did this thing called tabling. So because the table is in one spot and it's a table, you are an easy target. And so, you know, you attract everybody. You know, the tabling is kind of the version of like the trawling net. Like you just put the net down and you just catch everything. You know, the fish, the logs, the seaweed, the dirt, the trash, all of that stuff. So that was tabling for us, and so we had some really interesting people that would come up and talk to us. One of these people, I think he's my favorite. He was this hobo, and he always wore this black exercise suit. It was like a warm-up suit. So he had this like black Adidas suit on, and he came up to us, and you know, this overpowering scent of body odor would come, and it was just like so bad. We would just kind of sit there and, you know, make faces, and but discreetly, of course. But he would just talk to us, and so we kind of try to listen. It was really hard to understand what he was saying, but one of the times that I actually got something was when he was telling us this story, and he was just like, yeah, so I was watching on TV this one time, and there was a soldier on the TV, and he was a war hero. He was such a great hero. And so like he had this umbrella with him that he carried everywhere. And this was the middle of the summer, so I have no idea why, but he had this umbrella, and he just pulled up. He was just like, you know, he would always fight like this, and he'd hold the umbrella and he'd just be like, he was a great hero. And he would demonstrate this AK-47 guy like shooting bullets. And so ever since, you know, we would see him all over the city. So every time we'd see him, we're like, hey, there's Rambo guy. And like, yeah, so yeah, he was Rambo guy. The Tower of Babel. You know how right around that area of Genesis, there was a guy named Nimrod? And, you know, we all make fun of his name, you know, he's an idiot, stuff like that. Nimrod. Well, apparently this guy, Nimrod, was one of the principal ancestors of Hungarians. Like, pretty direct descendants of his were these two guys that the previous story was about. Yeah, he's there in the Bible, apparently. And also a very Hungarian name appears in the Bible. It's Arpad. It's never really mentioned as a main biblical character, but it appears in the genealogies that they give in every book in the Old Testament, practically. This guy Arpad appears in there, and that's a pretty Hungarian name. Like, not many other cultures use that name. Well, some of the pronunciations for these are kind of hard, so just kind of bear with me. So we'll start out with yes and no. For yes, you say igen, so it's igen, and for no, you just say nem. So just like that, nem. For hello and goodbye, you actually use the same word, and there are like a ton of different words that you can use. One of the ones that the old people kind of use, but sounds cooler to me, is servus. So you say servus. So like that, and you make sure to roll your R's when you speak Hungarian. So they say servus. If you're talking with youth or someone kind of your own age, you say szia, kind of like see ya, and you say that when you say hello and say goodbye. So you say szia. When you ask someone how they are, you say hogy vagy. So it kind of sounds, it's hogy vagy, so it's two words. The last letter of those two words are kind of complicated, so it kind of sounds like hogy vagy, but it's a little softer than that. So hogy vagy. For what is your name, this actually translates to how do they call you, and you would say hogy hívnak. So hogy hívnak. For please, you would say kérem or kérlek. The first one, kérem, is more formal, whereas if you say kérlek, that's going to be more informal. For sorry, you say bocsánat, bocsánat. How much does it cost? So if you want to ask for the price of food or something, you would say mennyibe kerül. So mennyibe kerül. Where are you from? If you'd like to ask someone that, they would say to you, honnan jössz. Where do you come from, literally. And then for thank you, if you want to say thanks to someone, you say köszönöm. So it's köszönöm. So yeah, those are some common phrases.